The tone surrounding Eric Dane's passing shifted dramatically only days after the initial tributes began to fade, when Laura Ann Tull, a former background actress on Grey's Anatomy, took to social media with a series of posts that immediately sparked controversy. Until that moment, Tull was largely unknown to the general public, but her statements quickly placed her at the center of a growing and emotionally charged debate. In blunt, unfiltered language, she accused the late Eric Dane of bullying behavior during her time on the show, describing him in harsh terms and framing her experience as one marked by mistreatment and distress. What made these posts particularly jarring was not just their content, but their timing. Dayne had passed away only days earlier, and fans were still processing the loss when screenshots of Tull's words began circulating across platforms. Many readers encountered her claims without any prior context, which caused confusion and shock almost instantly. Within hours, the narrative around Dayne's legacy began to fracture, as social media users debated whether her decision to speak out at that moment was an act of long-delayed honesty or an inappropriate disruption of a period of mourning. As attention intensified, Tull escalated the conversation by making a far more serious assertion that she had reported her experiences to production and that those complaints played a role in Dayne's exit from the series in 2012. This claim fundamentally challenged the long-standing public explanation for his departure, which had been widely understood as a creative and financial decision rather than the result of misconduct. For many fans, this was the moment when disbelief turned into alarm, because it suggested a hidden history that had never been acknowledged by the network, the producers, or Dayne himself. The reaction online quickly became polarized. Some users defended Tull, arguing that survivors of workplace mistreatment should not be silenced by expectations of timing or decorum. They pointed out that background actors often lack power and visibility, and that speaking up, even years later, can come at a personal cost. Others, however, expressed discomfort with the fact that the allegations were being made after Dayne's death, emphasizing that he could no longer respond, clarify, or provide his side of the story. For them, the posts felt less like accountability and more like an unbalanced public reckoning. Media outlets soon picked up the story, amplifying Tull's statements and further accelerating public debate. Headlines focused on the contrast between the beloved image of McSteamy and the darker portrayal presented in her posts. Yet, even as the story gained traction, a crucial detail remained unchanged. None of the allegations had been independently verified. There were no official statements confirming her claims, no documentation released, and no acknowledgement from the network or the show's creators at that stage. By the end of that week, the conversation surrounding Eric Dane had shifted completely. What began as collective grief had turned into a complicated mix of mourning, skepticism, empathy, and unease. Laura Ann Tull's posts had not only reignited interest in a decade-old departure from Grey's Anatomy, but it also reopened broader questions about power, memory, and truth in Hollywood, questions that would only grow louder as the story continued to unfold. As the controversy gained momentum, many viewers began asking a basic but crucial question: who exactly is Laura Ann Tull, and what was her connection to the show at the center of this debate? According to her own public accounts, Laura Ann Tull worked on Grey's Anatomy as a background performer, commonly referred to in the industry as an extra, for approximately 3 years, beginning around 2005. Her work placed her on set during some of the show's most successful and formative seasons, a time when the series was rapidly becoming a cultural phenomenon. Tull has stated that during her tenure, she did not portray a named or recurring character and did not have any speaking lines. Instead, she appeared in the background of scenes as hospital staff, often dressed as a nurse or doctor, filling out the busy environments that made Grey's Anatomy feel realistic and alive. These roles are essential to television production, yet they exist almost entirely outside the spotlight. Background actors are expected to be present but unobtrusive, contributing to the atmosphere without drawing attention away from the main cast. This position comes with significant limitations. Extras typically do not have contracts that span seasons, do not receive public credit, and rarely interact meaningfully with lead actors or producers. They often work long hours, remain silent on set, and rely heavily on being rehired for future work. Speaking up about discomfort or mistreatment can feel risky, particularly in the mid-2000s, when industry conversations around power imbalance and workplace behavior were far less developed than they are today. One of the most important elements of Tull's own narrative is her repeated acknowledgement that she never spoke directly to Eric Dane during her time on the show. In a 2018 essay, and again in recent statements, she explicitly said that despite being on the same set for years, there was no direct conversation between them. This admission has become central to how audiences interpret her claims, because it reframes the alleged behavior as indirect rather than confrontational. According to Tull, her experience was shaped not by personal exchanges, but by what she says she heard, observed, or felt within the broader environment of the set. This distinction has fueled debate. Supporters argue that a lack of direct interaction does not negate the possibility of a hostile or intimidating workplace, especially in a setting defined by hierarchy and celebrity. Critics, however, question how much influence or intent can be assigned without direct communication, particularly when memories are being revisited many years later. The fact that Tull never had a speaking role or a featured scene with Dayne complicates efforts to place her allegations within a clear, documented context. Ultimately, Laura Ann Tull's role on Grey's Anatomy positioned her close enough to observe the show's inner workings, but far enough removed to remain largely invisible, both to audiences and, arguably, to decision-makers. That reality sits at the heart of her claims and explains why her story has resonated with some viewers while raising doubts for others. Understanding who she was on set and the limitations of that position is essential to understanding why this controversy is so difficult to assess and why opinions around it remain deeply divided. Laura Ann Tull's allegations center on her claim that she was subjected to bullying behavior during her time working as a background actress on Grey's Anatomy, and that this behavior was connected to Eric Dane. According to her statements, the bullying was not defined by direct confrontations or personal exchanges, but by what she describes as a pattern of behavior that made her feel targeted, diminished, and uncomfortable in her workplace. She has emphasized that the harm she experienced came from overheard remarks, attitudes, and a general sense of hostility rather than face-to-face interaction. Tull has explained that, as a background performer, she felt particularly vulnerable to this kind of treatment. Extras occupy one of the lowest positions in the production hierarchy, and she has said that this imbalance amplified the emotional impact of any negative behavior. In her telling, even comments not directed straight at her carried weight, because they came from someone with star power, influence, and authority on set. She has suggested that this dynamic created an atmosphere where she felt powerless to respond or defend herself, especially at a time when raising concerns could risk future employment. Supporters of Tull argue that bullying in professional environments does not always take the form of direct insults or overt aggression. They point out that reputational harm, dismissive attitudes, and negative talk behind someone's back can be just as damaging, particularly in workplaces built on hierarchy and silence. From this perspective, the absence of a direct conversation between Tull and Dayne does not automatically invalidate her experience, because the emotional consequences she describes could still be real. Critics, however, remain skeptical, largely because of the lack of specific, verifiable details. Tull has not publicly identified exact dates, witnesses, or documented incidents that could independently support her claims. No other cast or crew members have come forward to confirm seeing or hearing the behavior she describes, and no formal complaints from that period have been made public. This absence of corroboration has led some to question whether the allegations reflect bullying in the conventional sense, or whether they represent a deeply personal interpretation of a stressful and hierarchical work environment. The debate around these allegations highlights a broader issue within the entertainment industry: how experiences are validated when they exist largely in perception rather than documentation. Tull's account forces audiences to grapple with uncomfortable questions about whose voices are heard, how power shapes workplace dynamics, and how difficult it can be to assess truth when years have passed and key figures are no longer able to respond. Rather than offering clear answers, this section of the story deepens the uncertainty, leaving the public to weigh empathy against evidence as the controversy continues to unfold. The most controversial and far-reaching part of Laura Ann Tull's statements is her claim that her complaints to the production team contributed to Eric Dane's departure from Grey's Anatomy in 2012. According to Tull, she raised concerns about her treatment on set to the office of Shonda Rhimes, and those complaints, she alleges, played a role in Dayne being fired from the series. This assertion dramatically challenges the long-accepted narrative surrounding his exit and has become the focal point of the entire controversy. For more than a decade, Dayne's departure from Grey's Anatomy has been publicly understood as a business and creative decision. At the time the show was entering a new phase, cast salaries were rising, and long-running series often reshuffle characters to control costs and refresh storylines. Eric Dane himself addressed this openly in later years, most notably during a 2024 appearance on The Armchair Expert, where he stated that he was let go. In that interview, he attributed the decision to financial considerations and shifting creative direction, emphasizing that such changes are common in television and not necessarily personal. What Dayne did not mention in any public interview was the existence of complaints from a background actor or any internal disciplinary action tied to his behavior. Throughout his life, he never publicly acknowledged Laura Ann Tull, nor did he reference any investigation, warning, or formal reprimand connected to his time on the show. This absence has become a key point for skeptics, who argue that if such a complaint had significantly influenced his firing, it likely would have surfaced in some form over the years, either through industry reporting or Dayne's own reflections. As of now, there is no public confirmation supporting Tull's claim. ABC, Shondaland, and Dayne's representatives have not released statements verifying that her complaint played any role in his exit. No internal documents, emails, or testimonies have been made available to substantiate the allegation. Without independent verification, the claim remains a personal assertion rather than an established fact, leaving audiences caught between two conflicting versions of the same event. This contradiction is what makes Section 5 so pivotal to the story. If Tull's claim were ever confirmed, it would fundamentally alter how Eric Dane's career and his departure from Grey's Anatomy is understood. If it remains unverified, it raises serious questions about how narratives can be reshaped years later, especially when the person at the center of those claims is no longer alive to respond. More than any other part of this controversy, the dispute over Dayne's exit exposes the fragile line between personal truth, public record, and the lasting consequences of allegations made after the fact.